Let me just say it's difficult to follow real scientists. I thought Nilda and Dick did a great job, and I consider myself more of a nozzle head. So we're going to shift gears a little bit and discuss control measures now for Palmer amaranth, or Palmer pigweed. If Dr. Oliver wasn't here, that's what I would call it, as most of you guys do. Hopefully by now you all understand that we're here primarily today talking about glyphosate-resistant pigweed. Many of you may or may not be old enough in the room to remember that before glyphosate was introduced, we used a lot of ALS herbicides for the control of pigweed. So out there in the state, many of these populations that are resistant to glyphosate are also resistant to the ALS chemistry, such as Scepter, Pursuit, Cadre, Synchrony. And some of the data that I'm going to show you today is from a site that is both glyphosate and ALS resistant. This makes it difficult when you make recommendations. You got to kind of ask guys where they're at, what the history of their farm has been, whether they've used these products or not before you start recommending control options. Probably we also have a lot of resistance to the yellow dinitroaniline herbicides such as Prowl and Treflan. Dr. Oliver mentioned those and how long they've been in existence and been used. And I'm going to show you some data today at two locations where they look pretty good. In fact, one of those locations is actually in Jackson County. So if any of you guys are here in Jackson County, from Jackson County, don't throw anything at me when I show that Prowl and Treflan are actually providing pretty good control of this pigweed. Because there are farms where we have probably resistant pigweed to all three of these modes of action. So we just need to be aware of that. I'm going to give you Bob's 3 B's for resistance management in soybeans. And if you can remember these, we'll just kind of go through them and see if you guys agree with the logic. First of all, I think you need to be aware. And hopefully by being here today, you're going to become aware that this problem exists in the state. You're going to maybe leave here with an idea of what to look for, what to think about that you saw on your farm last year, and just be aware that this problem may be lurking out there. Hopefully, by the time you leave, you'll be informed of what you need to do in order to control this pigweed in your crop next year. And above all, I'm going to encourage you to be proactive in this problem. And we're going to get into a little bit of that and why that's important in terms of herbicide timings and things. But I'm going to say it here and hopefully remember to say it again as we go along. If you're not proactive in this approach and you're going to continue to stay in a Roundup Ready system and utilize other products to control those weeds, you don't want to go out there and find out with the first application of glyphosate that you have resistance. At that point, we don't have a lot of recommendations that we can make. And unfortunately, that's where we were at in a lot of farms in 2009 and 2010. So going into 2011, be aware. If you made an application of glyphosate and you had survivors in those fields, you probably learned this past year that we don't have a club in our bag in conventional or Roundup Ready soybeans, and really even in the new LibertyLink soybeans, to combat pigweeds that are that big, that make it through the first application. So be aware that this problem exists. If you did have this problem and you came back with another application of glyphosate in 2010, likely mid-season, you observed this out in the field. These misses, these patterns. It's been mentioned that it's spread mechanically. I've seen combine paths through more fields than I care to talk about, where we had one small problem like this. Last year, we run a combine through there. Well, guess what? They don't all come out 20 yards behind the combine, do they, Dr. Oliver? They ride the combine down the field, back through the field, over to the next field you cut. If you've ever tried to clean weeds out of a combine, which we have, it can be very difficult. You got to take the thing completely apart, power wash it, clean it up, and you'll still end up finding those pigweeds in the subsequent year. So be aware when you run a combine through this situation right here that you're infesting that field for next year, and you need to be thinking about what to do in 2011. 2010 for many will be remembered as the year of the pigweed harvest. This was actually a picture that was taken in 2009, but it didn't take very long on this particular farm to go from those 1 or 2 survivors to a full-on infestation of Palmer amaranth. This was bad enough that it encouraged us to put out plots right here in St. Francis County last year. We had a very good cooperator in Sid Fogg over at our Widener location, and I'm going to discuss some of the data that came from this population of pigweed. Sid was good enough to let us invade his farm most of the summer, invite about 1,000 of our friends to come look at his farm and look at his plots, and we had a very successful summer over here. I want to share some of those results with you guys. The next part of that is to be informed, and I mentioned that by being here today, you're informed. Well, unfortunately, for a lot of guys, they were not informed in 2009 and 10. They come out with a quarter Roundup. That didn't work. Well, we had some misses. Maybe we'll come back with another quart, and this time let's put a 1/4 ounce of Classic with it. Or let's put 6 ounces of Flex Star with it, or maybe some Synchrony. That just made them mad. This was an ALS and a glyphosate-resistant population. Is somebody a bad farmer for doing that? No, they're a good farmer. They just were not informed. So I hope that you guys, by coming here today, will be informed enough to be proactive in 2011 when you go and make decisions. All is not lost. That's a fairly identical location for these two pictures. I didn't credit it, but this is Ken Smith's camera work. There's the same White House in the background right there. So as you look at these pictures, you can go from this to this in 1 year with the technology that we've got, and I'm going to go through some of those options for you guys. As we look at the key tools in the fight against pigweed, I've pulled a few out to highlight here. I'm going to pick on a few as we go through this talk, but my purpose today is to really talk to you guys about the stuff that works. I mean, what are we really going to need to rely on? And down the road, what are we going to need to do to be able to continue to rely on these tools for pigweed management? First of all, it's already been mentioned a number of times, we're going to talk about residual herbicides. This is not something that has had a lot of discussion in the last 10 years. It used to be very common. Prefix, Dual, Treflan, Prowl, Authority MTZ, all of the Valor-containing products and premixes. A product called Boundary is being introduced. That's Dual and Metribuzin together, metolachlorometribuzin. There's a new product called Fierce that the guys at the Valent booth would probably like to talk to you guys about, that will be a player for pigweed. These offer very good pigweed control if you get a rainfall and get them activated. Post-emergence soybeans, an area of contention right now. What can we put with it to control them? Well, in the case of ALS-resistant and glyphosate-resistant pigweed, we really, truly have one option right now, and that's famecifin. It's the best one that we've looked at. We're heavily relying on this class of chemistry right now, but the bottom line is, if you've got 2 to 3 inch tall pigweed and you call me, this is probably what I'm going to recommend. A secondary option to that would be Blazer or Cobra if they're very small. We can kill most of them with a shot of those. There are a lot of other products out there that have some activity on pigweed, but at the rates that we're looking at and timings, it can be really difficult to get them with some of these other products. 2,4-DB, some of you may have heard about ET last year. You've got to be extremely, extremely early, and really it's impractical with some of these products. We're going to talk about the LibertyLink soybean system. This is the new tool in the bag, only introduced a couple of years ago. I'm going to immediately start recommending that you use residuals in the LibertyLink system, because one thing I don't want to see is a complete reliance on Ignite like we have glyphosate for the last 10 years, and just see a development of resistance to Ignite. And trust me, the way we've been using Ignite in cotton and soybeans going after large escape pigweed, we're asking for it. We're just asking for the development of resistance to this brand new technology. And we're going to talk some about cultural practices. We need to start thinking about rotational crops. We got to think about water management again to activate these pre's, seeding rates and methods as we go through this. If you're going to stay in Roundup Ready or conventional, my recommendations are pretty much the same. Point blank, we're going to use a residual up front. If you're not considering using a residual in these fields where you've had some escaped pigweed this year, I don't even know if I want to talk to you or not, because that's the first line of defense. That's the first thing you can do to try to control these escaped pigweeds. We're going to apply early. We're going to recommend about a 2-inch pigweed for our famecifin applications, for any Flex Star or Flex Star GT that goes out. What does a 2-inch pigweed look like? I'm not even sure I know. All the pictures we've seen so far, they've been a little bit bigger than that. I went out to our greenhouse. That over there is a 1-inch pigweed, that little bitty plant. And based on what some of y'all are telling me about the ability to get across these big wide acres that we farm, we need to be getting it on the books to spray this field when it's a 1-inch pigweed, because it may be, how many days later, Dick? 4 or 5 days later? A week? No more. 1 week. 1 day? One day it could be 3 inches tall. Seriously, we got to get that on the books today if we want to get it sprayed before it's too big. If you wait till you have a 2 to 3 inch pigweed out there, it's going to be too big for FlexStar. It may be too big for Ignite in LibertyLink beans. So we got to rethink scouting soybeans. Those of you that are consultants out here, I talked to a farmer last year. Oh, he was mad. He got his first scouting report on his beans, and the pigweeds were already 3 to 4 inches tall. And I said, whew, we may or may not get them. Let's hit them, yesterday with FlexStar. So we got to rethink our recommendations in soybeans. We got to use a residual. If you use a residual, you may buy yourself more time. If you get it activated, you may not have to get back there so fast. I'm going to recommend that you avoid using Prefix Pre. I haven't said it yet, but Prefix is Dual plus FlexStar or Reflex Famecifin. And it is absolutely probably the best pigweed material I've looked at across different systems and different programs. This is the best one. Why would I recommend not to use it in Roundup Ready beans? It doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? It contains almost a pint of FlexStar equivalent. And in order for FlexStar to be effective on pigweeds, we need to be at the full pint to a pint and a half rate, or a pint and a quarter rate. Okay? If you use your prefix up front and you don't get a rain, we don't have anything to come back with. You're going to come back with Cobra or Blazer, and you're going to have to be extremely, extremely early over here in this time and to get effective control. You can use other pre's. You can use Dual. You can use Authority MTZ. There's other ones, the Valor containing products. I'm going to recommend one of those. They're almost as good as Prefix with a rain. In some cases can be completely equal to Prefix. And so I think that's probably something we need to conserve and save for our post-emerge application. If you're growing beans on wide rows and you know you have a resistant pigweed problem, you're setting yourself up for a rougher summer, especially in the Roundup Ready and conventional beans. You're leaving a lot of space out there and a lot of open ground for pigweeds to get into, and the use of at least probably 2 residuals is in order. One early and probably another shot, such as some Dual post-emerge or something like that, coming back in order to fill in the gap until you can get those beans to canopy closure. And that's a cultural practice that we need to look at. Most of my data that I'll be presenting is in drill beans, and we get canopy closure very quickly as long as we have good moisture, and that really helps us in terms of pigweed management. Don't wait to find out if it's resistant. At that point, you're too late. You need to be proactive on this. You need to be thinking about 2010 going into 2011. Identify those fields where you had a problem. Get a residual out up front. Get that first early post application on the books in a timely manner to do some good. What about the residual options? I mentioned there's a lot of them that do have activity on pigweed, and there's some that have more activity than others. We had 2 locations this year, one at our pigweed site at Newport, another at the resistant site at Widener. At both of these locations, we did get a rainfall for activation. We only got about a ½ inch of rain, and I think Dr. Norsworthy is going to talk about moisture requirements for these herbicides to get activated here in a little bit. So keep that in mind that this is 1 year's data, 2 locations. But again, some of those products that I mentioned, many of them provided very good control for 2 to 3 weeks after planting. They start to play out after about 3 to 4 weeks. We start to see some big differences. So most of the things up here, at least in the 60% or better category, gave us about 3 weeks of residual control. It bought a lot of time to consider making that post-application. Some of the better ones out at 50 days were Dual plus Sharpen. Sharpen is a new product from BASF. We've been looking at a 1 to 2 ounce rate. We did see a little bit of residual out of Sharpen on Pigweed, combined with Dual looked very good in our residual trials. In Vive, it's one of the Valor premixes. It also contains Synchrony, did a good job. Straight Flexstar, or Formesifin, which would be Reflex in cotton, also providing greater than 90% control. Fierce, the new premix that I mentioned. Treflan PPI, both locations, pre-plant incorporated Treflan did very well. Obviously don't have any DNA resistance. Even out to 50 days, Valor alone, Dual alone, Authority MTZ, Prowl H2O has never been quite as good as Treflan on Pigweed, but those products, again, providing a really good foundation for a pigweed program where we plan to come back with Flexstar or Flexstar GT Post. Some things that did not provide as good a residual, I mentioned these were ALS resistant populations, so you wouldn't expect some of those to work. We were just checking these things out. You hear a lot of home remedies when we start to put these trials together. 80% or better, 70 days out. Again, looking at Prefix, Flexstar, Envive, Fierce, and that Dual plus that high rate of Sharpen. So there are some key players that are rising to the top in terms of residual options for pigweed. Looking at some post-emerge options. Now I mentioned that once we put out a quarter Roundup, we find out that we're too late to do anything about it. This is our Widener location, again, a glyphosate and ALS resistance. Some of you in this room probably saw this trial. This is our pigweed programs for Roundup Ready or conventional beans. Just looking at tank mix options. Now these were applied 7 days after emergence on the pigweed, or on the soybeans. That's the first thing I want to point out. This is an extremely early post-application. We were about 1 trifoliate on these beans. So we're getting a very, very early shot on very small pigweed. Then we came back and rated 44 days after that went out. Pretty much we were seeing the control we got of that population that was there at this point. A little bit of residual maybe showing through. I've had a lot of guys say, well, is there any way I can still go total post and get by in a Roundup Ready system? Well, the closest we came was putting either Prefix or using the Flexstar GT, which is Flexstar plus glyphosate. And that gave us approximately 90% control out about 44 days. So when you put it out that early and you get a rain, you can get pretty good control with Prefix and Flexstar tank mixed with glyphosate. Again, ALS resistant, so you wouldn't really expect those to contribute a lot, and they did not to that program. We go on out about 62 days after the post-treatment, you start to see the lack of residual control and what that causes in your program. We're still holding there at right around 90% where we got the activating rain and got the residual out with the post. 90% control of a haired-over population of pigweed is really not where we want to be. Okay? That's not acceptable. Several people looked at these plots. They didn't think that was acceptable. And, that's about the best we can do with a one-shot program. So when I say we need to use a residual up front, this is the data, the kind of data that I'm basing that on. If we look at our pre followed by post options, notice the PowerPoint changed my gradient there on the left-hand side. We're going from 84 to 100 now, so these numbers are a little better than they look from the previous slide. Prowl PPI followed by Flexstar GT. I mentioned the DNA still had a lot of good activity, 96. Envive, Prefix, Authority MTZ followed by Flexstar. We're all above 90% control, and these are program approaches. So you kind of see how the pre followed by the Formesifin containing post helped us put together a really good program. Keep in mind, we primarily had pigweed at this location. If you throw in grass weeds, cuckleburr, other broadleaf weeds, you can really start to see how the glyphosate component adds a lot to this program. Sickle pod, some of these other tough to control weeds. All this data is highlighting how to get pigweed out of the way. Boundary, the Dual Syncor or the metolachlor metribuzin product. Prefix followed by Sequence. And Boundary followed by Prefix, all up above 96% control. I should point out that Prefix followed by FlexStar GT, was all too standard of a program this past year. I had a lot of folks calling me about that program. That exceeds the maximum label fameciphin. And this gets back into why I would say we need to avoid prefix, look at using one of these other programs, and not overdo our fameciphin label. 2 reasons, well maybe 3. Number 1, it's off-label. I can't recommend it. Number 2, you get into carryover issues. And the third, most important thing that I'm worried about is an over-reliance on the PPO chemistry. We're absolutely right here selecting for resistant pigweed. Okay? That 4%, 6%, whatever that we're leaving there, very much concerns me that this is a very short-lived program. However, the reality is we're going to have to rely on the PPOs to get us through. We're going to get into a little crop rotation discussion here toward the end. Okay, so LibertyLink soybeans, the new technology introduced last year, first time there was any real significant acres. Very successful overall from what I could see out in the fields. We've had very good luck with LibertyLink, the LibertyLink system and Ignite herbicide. My understanding is they have just about sold out of seed, although I would encourage you to see Bayer or some of the seed dealers in the back to ask them about that. Right off the bat, one of the things that Bayer asked us to do was to look at program approaches in LibertyLink soybeans. That is, incorporate other herbicides and other modes of action into this. We've been doing this for the last 3 years in our research program. It's much easier to have a successful LibertyLink soybean program if you incorporate some residual program up front or at least a tank mix partner very early post with Ignite. So you're going to hear me say use a residual, any residual, and I'll elaborate on that here in a little while. If you're going to make a post application, make it early. Same timing we talked about with FlexStar applies to Ignite as far as I'm concerned. It needs to go out extremely early for the post shot. If you will use a good residual program and you will drill beans, you may only need 1 post application of Ignite in a good program approach if you can get canopy closure. One thing that differentiates the LibertyLink system from the glyphosate or Roundup Ready recommendations that we just talked about is you do have 2 post applications of Ignite at your disposal. Whereas in the glyphosate program, we come back with the GT, with the FlexStar tank mixed with Roundup, and we're pretty much done for the year. Apply 10 to 14 days after emergence on 2 to 3 inch weeds if you want to be successful in the LibertyLink system. I want to share a little bit of data with you. We look at Ignite alone, a single application, 80% control. This is at Widener. Go over there and put any residual under that, and you bump that control up closer to 100%. And that is definitely where we want to be with this system. One final note on the LibertyLink system as Elton is standing up over there. Again, you look at prefix followed by Ignite, Valor followed by Ignite at Widener. Very good. What about just a double shot of Ignite? What's that going to do? Well, if we go out and time it right, we can approach 100% control with Ignite. It can be done. I don't want to do it from a resistance standpoint. I don't think you can do it from a timing standpoint. The only difference between 75 and close to 100% control in this slide is 12 days. This application, the first application, was made 12 days later than this application. So that's not a very big window to get over, say, 1,000 acres of soybeans. Again, this is a good system, a system that can work. Many of you may have saw those plots. Just as a couple of final comments, some people have still told me, well, Roundup alone is working for me. I say, great, it's time to change. If we want to prevent resistance, change it. Change, if you grew LibertyLink last year, change that. Where we have gotten into a problem is continuously using the same technology over and over again. At least act to it, and I really encourage you to be proactive. We're going to keep farming. I've mentioned some new technologies here to you. Herbicide rotation and not relying on the same thing over and over again every year is really the only answer that we have. It's been mentioned before. We don't have a lot of new products on the way, so we have to rely on the ones that we have right now. And again, one final plea, don't wait and spray Roundup next year to find out if you have resistance. Think about those fields. Don't fall into that trap, because when you call me, you already know what I'm going to say.